I think my problem with books turned into a full series or not a limited series is that I want everything wrapped up with a bow on it as quickly as possible. Like, some shows shouldn't be movies, which I can appreciate. I want the whole story. I don't want it cut up into an hour and a half or 2 hours. But 8 episodes is enough. And 8 episodes was enough to tell this story, and they decided not to, which I'm still gonna watch season 2. But today, I say all that to say today we're talking about Black Cake, which was probably one of my favorite books of the year. I think I gave it a 4.5 on Storygraph, which I'm sticking with. I'm trying to, maybe I shouldn't do this. I'm comparing it to a book I gave a 5-star, which was In Every Mirror, She's Black. But maybe I shouldn't compare them. Anyway, that's number 1 for me, and Black Cake is a close second. So let's get into it. Before we discuss what Black Cake is about, let's talk about the title. I tried to ask anyone I could what Black Cake was. Like, I could have Googled it, obviously, which I did, but I also just wanted firsthand knowledge of a firsthand description of what Black Cake is. And it kept being described to me as rum cake, but when I look up rum cake, it's not Black Cake. And so I, in my research, found that Black Cake is fruit is soaked in rum and then incorporated into the batter of the cake. And it turns black, I think, because of the fruit. Whereas a regular rum cake, if you look up a rum cake online, it's not black. Editor's note, browning liquid is also added to the batter in order to give it an even deeper color. So it's not just the fruit. Also, you can brown sugar in some recipe. I'm not a professional, but yeah, browning liquid. So this is a very specific Caribbean type of cake, which I almost tried it once, but it had milk in it and I can't have milk. So I passed on it and I regret it. So if anyone wants to bring me a rum cake ever again, milk or not, let me know. So that is what Black Cake is, but let's get into the book. Black Cake was written by Charmaine Wilkerson. She's a Jamaican-American journalist, born in Jamaica and moved to New York in her childhood. She currently lives in Rome, which is very interesting and something that she kind of incorporates into the book, which we'll get into. I appreciate at the end of the book ends and there's kind of this portion that talks about how she incorporated Jamaica into the writing. Some of what she talks about or some of what she describes in Jamaica are real places in Jamaica, and some of them are fictional, which I think is very important to differentiate, because sometimes we take books written by people from a certain place and take it all as truth and expect Jamaica to be what they have described. So I appreciated that kind of cliff note at the end of the book. So let me read a quick synopsis. 2 estranged siblings must set aside their differences to deal with their mother's death and her hidden past. A journey of discovery that takes them from the Caribbean to London to California and ends with her famous Black Cake. I feel like, just a little note, it's interesting because Black Cake is almost a character in the book. Like, it doesn't have a personality, obviously, but it really brings people together. It's really like whether it's good or bad, they make this cake around the holidays. So in the present day, it's like a good reminder. It's a very positive thing. And their mother carries it through her life. And this recipe is very important to her. But it comes up in very traumatic times of her life as well. Anyway, I really love this book. So here are a few of my thoughts on the book and why. One reason, which I need to just let this go, but one reason I think I did not give this a 5 is because the kids are very late to realize that their mom is talking about themselves. So not really a spoiler, or is talking about herself. Not really a spoiler, but the mom passes away. That's where this book kind of starts. She has passed away and left some audio recordings that she did with her lawyer to play for her children. In the recording, she starts talking about this woman who grows up in the Caribbean and is sharing all of these experiences that this girl had. And it takes them a few listens to realize that she is talking about herself. But because as a reader, I know the context, I wasn't surprised. So it just felt silly for them to not immediately be like, oh, this is our mom talking about herself. Like, it felt like it took a bit for them to be like, oh, she's talking about her. This is our mom she's talking about. In the beginning, they're like, whose story is she telling? Like, why is she telling us about this woman? When I'm like, why else would she be telling it? But okay, I have to put myself in their shoes because they were raised thinking one thing, obviously. So let me give them the benefit of the doubt. But I was like, why did it take y'all so long to catch on to that? Anyway, so that's the one part that nicked them like 1 point. So maybe I'll give it a 4.9. Without any more spoilers about the book, I don't want to spoil things too much. I'm looking at my notes. What made me love the book was the ending. The book is great. As I was reading it, I loved it. But the ending, I almost cried in the middle of Lidl. I was in the grocery store listening to the audiobook. And as it's coming to an end, I have to fight the urge to shed a few tears. It was so sad, but so beautifully done. Go read this book, y'all. So this is going to be a spoiler. I can't not do spoilers. So if you don't want any more, say goodbye here. Sign off. I'll see you in the next video. There is a part, so the main character, the mother of the two siblings, her birth name was Covey. But as she has to escape her family because she's being married off to this man named Little Man, she has to run away so that she doesn't have to marry him. She ends up changing her identity to Eleanor. So her children know her as Eleanor as they're growing up. But her name is Covey, and when she lived in the Caribbean, she had a best friend named Bunny. Bunny hadn't seen her since that wedding day when she ran away and all the chaos happened. But Covey's son takes her to see a speaker who is a professional swimmer, and it turns out to be her best friend, Bunny. And Covey doesn't want to blow her cover, so she doesn't, have a huge outburst about seeing her best friend again. But that was such a beautiful moment. Like, seeing them reunite and or reading about their reunification and her trying to make plans to see her again in the future. This is why I cry and I can't even talk about it. That was the last time they see each other before Covey passed away. And it was just heartbreaking. But I think it's one thing I have to work on is understanding. How do I describe this? Bunny is a lesbian, and in the book, as in present day, it talks about her being in a relationship with a woman. I don't remember it being discussed when they were children. In the show it is, which I think is important, but not in the book. And as I was reading, I was like, oh, Bunny must have been in love with Covey when they were younger. Let me know if y'all got that sense, because this happened to me. I was reading another book and people were like, in discussion, they were like, oh, they definitely liked each other. And I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Anyway, did you get the hint that Bunny was in love with Covey when they were teens? Because I didn't. And I don't know if I fell asleep. I don't know. Did I miss it? All in all, like I said, I'm giving the book a 4.9. I thought it was fantastic. It was beautiful. It was just the one thing that irked me about the kids not getting it soon enough. I want to talk about the show now, and there will be more spoilers about the show, but not completely because there's going to be a second season apparently. So let's get into that. First of all, the casting for this show was fantastic. I tried to avoid all of the advertisements for the show, all the commercials because I was reading the book before the show came out, and so I didn't want any spoilers. And I was a little hesitant. This woman, whose name I don't know, I've seen her in 2 other things. One of them was this movie, and I can't help but think about her as this character. And so when I saw her cast in Black Cake, I was like, this is not going to be good. But I gave it a chance, and it was fantastic. I'm not Jamaican. I barely heard a Jamaican accent. And so not true. But I don't know. I can't confirm if anyone's Jamaican accent is good in this show. But I think she was pretty convincing. So that's my 2 cents. And the person that plays the older version, she plays Covey. And the woman that plays the older version of her, they have the exact same nose. The casting director needs a bonus immediately because they look so much alike. It's wild. 10 stars for the casting, absolutely. Also, a special shout out to this man because he's great. He's British. And I knew this because he also was in The Strays on Netflix, and he has his British accent. And when I saw him, I was watching the show with my boyfriend, and I was like, he's so familiar. And then I remember where I saw him from, and my boyfriend was like, yeah, that he's a British rapper. And I was like, oh, his American accent is so good. He had me fooled because I was like, he's British? But of course he is. I've seen him act. So those are all the kudos I have for the stars. Everyone is fantastic, but those 2 especially need a special shout out. So a lot of the plot is a bit different in the show versus the movie. They stick to a lot of the main themes, of course, but the mother, Covey, ends up having her firstborn daughter gets adopted, and they do a really good job of showing what that looked like. That part wasn't in the book, so the adoption, of course, was in the book, but her time before giving birth and giving up the baby, or the baby being taken from her, was not in the book. But I think it really added to the show, and I appreciated that. Now, this child, what was her name? Matilda Marble. She works as like a food writer. She's a journalist who lives in Rome, so very much like the author. But she ends up getting canceled in the show because what she likes to talk about is indigenous foods. But in doing so, she really kind of talks down to people when they think that their foods are really a part of their culture when the ingredients come from another place. Specifically, if we talk about rum cake, she's like, well, this is not indigenous to the Caribbean because sugar came from somewhere else. I don't know. I don't remember the facts. But in the book, as she says these things, I'm like, you need to chill. You need to calm down. I get what you're trying to say, but the execution is not there. And they really hammered in on that point in the show, so much so that she gets canceled on Twitter. And she's having this conversation with a black girl because, of course, a black girl had to call her out for being problematic. Anyway. And she ends up, the girl is like, okay, but what culture do you have? That's not what she said, but that's basically what she said. And she's like, well, I'm Welsh and Irish. It was such a joke. That was fantastic, but being canceled was not in the book. Which brings me to a point that I think is really important. I don't know how old these kids are supposed to be. In the show, Covey, I believe, is supposed to be 18 when she gives birth to Marble Matilda, her firstborn. And that was, I think, 1965, which was the year my mother was born. And my mother is, we can all do the math. My mom is older than these characters are in the book or in the show. And it's very confusing because it's very much present day. The son drives a Tesla and is walking around in Louis Vuitton loafers, first of all. And so we know that this is taking place in 2023, but the actors are not old enough to be portraying children born in the 70s. And my thing is, so Matilda's born in the 60s. We don't have a direct timeline, but the Covey, I assume, gets married in her early 20s, like her official marriage to Gibbs, her husband, the father of her children, in her 20s, which would have been in the 70s. So her kids would have been in their 50s. Make it make sense. These are not 50-year-old In the show, Covey ends up taking the identity of a girl that dies, her friend that dies in a train accident. And the wristband with her name on it, with the name Eleanor, says date of birth 1947. So how are your kids 35? Your children, maybe they're 40. They're not that much older than me. I'm 30. But they look... Let me look him up, actually. Okay, Bashi, who plays Byron, is 38. Which means he would have been born in the 80s. This doesn't make sense. And it doesn't tell you what time it is in the book. The book was written in 2020. It was published in 2022. And so I'm assuming in the book it was not current day. Because the math is not mathing. And that is another bone I have to pick. So maybe we'll take it down to a 4.8 because I need a better timeline than this. I need to know what's happening. Anyway, let's move on. There is an episode where Byron, the son, gets arrested. And he is arrested for defending his sister. His sister was in an abusive relationship. She's in the show, she's scared and she's worried that something's going to happen. So she calls her brother. He shows up, immediately starts punching this man. This does not happen in the book. Thank God, because it feels so unnecessary. The police show up 2 seconds after he starts punching this man. He gets arrested and luckily they drop the charges, but it's all very... I'm tired of seeing black men get arrested on television. Like, I don't need to see it. It felt unnecessary. Another correction. In the book, Byron's girlfriend's son gets arrested. They're pulled over when they're driving and he gets arrested, but there are no charges pressed against him. It's just racism. But it's such a fleeting moment. Like, it's an opportunity to talk about race in America, but it still doesn't feel like it truly serves a purpose. And so for it to be turned into this even bigger thing in the show just felt really unnecessary. But I just wanted to come in and say there is some talk of it in the book, but it's not Byron. So yeah. I understand their point. They do a flashback and Byron's talking to his parents when he was in high school about his anger. And his mom was like, you have every right to be upset. You have every right to be mad. The world is frustrating. I get you. Which also felt like a very American conversation to be having. I was talking to my boyfriend whose family immigrated to the UK. His family is originally from Uganda and they've moved to a bunch of different places. It's a long story. But I was asking him, like, are these conversations that your parents had with you? Because I feel like being an immigrant requires so much of you. There's so many things happening and you're learning about a new culture. So to move to the United States and be trying to do so many things, learn so many things, to have the space and understanding to even have a conversation about American racial issues with your child feels very unrealistic, especially for the 80s. This feels like a new thing. Not to say that black people weren't talking to their children about race from day one, but it just feels like a new conversation that people are like, we need to start having this conversation. But they were in Southern California in the 80s, which had its own racial issues. The dad was a civil rights attorney, so I get it. I do get it, but it felt a little unrealistic. That's all I have to say. Anyway, so present day, he's letting out all this anger. His girlfriend just broke up with him 5 days after his mom passed away. So rightfully, he's mad and takes it out on his sister's ex. It just felt unnecessary. That's all I have to say. The show did not need to take us down that road. There were other ways to show him being upset. I think, so he was angry about his job. And his girlfriend was like, you need to talk to these white folks about how they're treating you. He didn't have it in him, understandably, because his mother just died. Like, can we handle one thing at a time? But anyway. So all this anger comes up. He ends up being a part of this diversity panel for his job where he's the only person of color. And he calls them out one of the people in the audience is like, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like being Black in your industry? And he was like, traumatic. So he goes viral. Everybody loves it. He gets his girl back, apparently. There's also a new storyline, which is why I'm going to watch season 2, because I'm like, what are you guys even doing? So Marble has a son. So this is Covey's firstborn. I hope you guys are keeping up with me. Has a son. And she's keeping this secret from him about her father, apparently. And that's not in the book. So I don't know what that is, but we're going to find out, hopefully. Hopefully they get renewed for a second season so we can get the answers to all these questions they're forcing us to have. Unlike in the book, which this also makes me really sad, and I almost cried watching this show, but I don't want to look like a punk in front of my boyfriend. But unlike in the book, Bunny and Covey do not get to see each other again. And that is heartbreaking to me and my homegirls. It's really sad. But Bunny has an even bigger role in the lives of the kids as a result. I think I don't know. She doesn't have a big part in their lives at the end. They see her and deliver this letter from Covey. But in the book, she's really a part of their healing process towards the end, which I thought was beautiful, but I would have rather Covey and Bunny be able to see each other. So this show does leave us with 4 questions that need to be answered. In the book, Byron's girl is pregnant. This also happens in the show, but in the show, she doesn't want kids. So it's like, is he going to be able to become a father? Especially because he's almost 60. He's not, but he's supposed to be. Anyway, so does Byron become a father? Do they stay together? What is Marble/Matilda's secret about her baby daddy? We'll hopefully find out. And then Matilda is Covey's mother. So this is confusing. Covey named her daughter after her mom, but when she was adopted, they gave her the name Marble and made Matilda her middle name. And so Covey's mom, the grandmother, Matilda, left Covey when she was a child because her dad was a gambler and couldn't keep any money in his pocket. So she was like, I need to get out of here so I can make a better life for me and my child, and then I'll come get my child. In the book, she passes away, which is really sad. I'm sorry, spoiler. She passes away before she can go and get Covey. The show doesn't talk about it. So I'm curious if they're going to bring it back up. Also in the book, the grandchildren are reunited with their grandfather. By grandchildren, I mean Benny, Byron, and Marble are reunited with Covey's dad, which is a whole thing in itself. This does not come up in the show. Hopefully it does come up in season 2. So those are all of my thoughts. Now we ask the question, which was better, the show or the film? I mean, the book or the movie? And of course I have to go with the book. No, the show is good in its own right. I highly recommend it. Even my boyfriend, he kept saying this is such a melodrama. Someone on Twitter was like, Black Cake is coming for This Is Us's neck or something like that. And so I'm like, yeah, it is. I think This Is Us is way more emotional every single episode. But it is a bit of a melodrama. It's still beautifully done. The cinematography is fantastic. And yeah, if you haven't read the book, I definitely recommend watching the show. If you haven't watched the show, do that. Most of all, read the book. I will say it's worth reading the book, and the book is better. That's all I have to say on that. Let me know your thoughts on Black Cake, the book, and the show in the comments. Next week, we will be talking about lessons in chemistry, so make sure you just subscribe so you can catch that video, and I'll see you then.